Well, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much to North East Economic Forum for having me along to this lunch, giving me a chance to meet and I hope very shortly to hear the views as well as the questions of people who've come to the meeting. Thank you for the introduction. Now, last time I was described as a warm-up act. I was actually the warm-up act to Ronnie Corbett. In the unlikely setting, I think it was the Institute of Directors annual dinner. I fear Ronnie Corbett is not with me and will not be following up, but I'll try as best I can to make up for that disappointment. I'm delighted to be here with Wendy Morton, our candidate here in Tynemouth, and delighted to hear what I've already heard from the Vice-Chancellor and everybody else about looking forward to the future of the North East. When I was a minister, I came here more frequently than once I went back to the pleasures of being a maverick backbencher when I found myself travelling here less often. I should imagine, I hope now to start coming here more regularly. And I was, I'm glad to say, able to give university status to Northumbria and other universities when I was Secretary of State. I came here actually, both at DTI and elsewhere, when we were talking then about the North East economy and where to go. And things have changed, just hearing those two presentations. We're talking about urban regeneration. Newcastle-on-Tyne, everybody knows, transformed city now compared with 20 years ago. But it was hard going. When I used to use the words about partnership, public-private sector partnership, that was regarded as a hostile ideology and not to be introduced into these matters of urban regeneration. We have moved on since then. And I found it, in places like Sunderland, the anxiety to preserve the old economy often took precedence over looking forward to the new economy. It was undoubtedly the case. Very difficult. I quite understand that Nissan was the future of Sunderland and shipbuilding was the past. But they were difficult times, and I think across the country, not just the North East, people now understand the realities of a globalised economy. What we're concentrating on is the future economy, and undoubtedly the future economy of the North East in particular needs to be strengthened. It is a sad truth, and in the comparatively prosperous times of the last decade, the economic gap between the southeast of the country and the rest, certainly between the southeast of the country and the northeast, has actually widened. And an excessive concentration on financial services, excessive concentration on the earnings of the City of London in particular, led to us having an unbalanced economy and an ever-widening gap in expectations, and as a country as a whole is now suffering the consequences. So it's back to how do we create not only firstly the conditions for economic recovery, but that recovery producing a more balanced economy across the country, but particularly balanced between not just financial services, which remains vital for us. We need London to remain the financial capital of Europe, but it will be a chastened City of London and probably a smaller City of London going forward. And then how do we rebalance it so we get back into some modern, high-tech, value-added manufacturing, the best of modern service, and how do we keep ourselves competitive in a global economy where everybody else will be trying to recover from the same terrible shocks that we've been through. Macroeconomic policy, obviously not the major subject today. It's plainly essential for anybody who can get anywhere to recover the conditions in which we can get back to normal growth. That undoubtedly means tackling the underlying big problem that government alone can tackle of debt and deficit. And the last years of the good years were all being carried along on a sea of household debt and public debt which was unaffordable. The sooner we tackle that and the sooner we actually produce a credible plan for getting rid of the bulk of the structural public deficit in the course of the next Parliament, the sooner we'll put some confidence back into the economy. And we'll also find it easier to keep down interest rates because the government's own debts will not be forcing up interest rates if we can get them under control. So that's all part of a bigger picture, which I certainly answer questions about, but that certainly has to be tackled. What we actually need, particularly in the North East, where quite rightly quite a lot of public sector jobs have been distributed here, we were moving public civil service jobs out of the south as well, where one of the big problems is the very heavy dependence on the public sector in the North East proportionately. Is plainly it's necessary to rebalance the economy by making the area even more attractive to new investment in a private sector economy and private sector jobs. And revival and recovery, if we can get them underway, obviously provide that opportunity if we make sure we have the conditions in place. Some things have to be done which obviously generally make the place attractive to industry and conducive to good investment and growth. The main constraints affecting small, medium-sized businesses now are, of course, firstly the problems in the credit markets, that it is in remains, we're nowhere near back to normality in the banking industry. The banks still have a long way to go to restore their balance sheets. They're fearful of the capital they're going to require for new regulation, and they will require more capital for regulation. They've raised their margins. They're being very cautious where they lend. And when I face any audience of small, medium-sized businessmen and ask what the major constraints are, one of the very first is the great difficulties of getting credit, which of course might hit people again if there's an upsurge in activity, because that's when you need credit to keep working capital going and so on. We don't want a second credit crunch. That's why we have to have some workable scheme, I still think, of credit guarantees to the banks. We've been advocating for the last 12 months a big loan guarantee scheme for all kinds of companies, but the bigger companies can now get back into the capital markets that small companies can't. And therefore something's got to be done to have a scheme whereby the banks are guaranteed against a large part of the risk. If they do make a commercial judgment to go in, we trust the banks will be more inclined and more encouraged, and they will, to free up finance for small and medium-sized business if they have a guarantee scheme of the kind we're proposing that takes quite a share of the risk, and that is absolutely essential. And then you have to look at the things that are particularly a problem for small, medium-sized business across the country as a whole. First problem is obviously tax. Won't go back to debt again. We're hoping to get debt under control by tackling the gross public spending levels of this country. And look first at public spending, but we hope to avoid raising taxation. In my opinion, it's quite clear that in terms of taxation, business taxes are a complete no-no for increases in the foreseeable future. We're hoping to find some way of avoiding or mitigating the national insurance tax increase that's already in the pipeline. I have to say, as a choice, as an ex-chancellor who raised taxes myself, getting out of a rather milder fiscal crisis in the early 90s, as a choice of tax, that's pretty dreadful when you're coming out of a recession. It's a rise in income tax for the generality of the working population under another name, but it's a tax on jobs so far as employers are concerned. But it's going to be a tall order avoiding it. No new taxes. And then where we can simplify the tax burden on companies, we can do so. We can actually reduce back to a more competitive level the headline rates of corporation tax, which have got too high vis-à-vis our competitors. 25% corporation tax can be achieved, 20% small business rate, if you tidy up the massive allowances and credits which distort, to a certain extent, the tax system now. We'll have a row, you've got to be careful what you're doing, but you can actually get down to every allowance, every credit was introduced in response to some lobby. They'll all come out of the woodwork. Some of the lobbies actually have a good argument. Not all of them. And you can get down to 25%, 20%, which is because we do have to look across and how competitive we can keep ourselves compared with other attractive places to base a business across Western Europe and elsewhere. And tax makes a difference to people's choices, and of course it makes a difference to the competitiveness of your businesses paying the tax vis-à-vis other people in other jurisdictions.